Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, the CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice of San Diego. And coming up on the show, we have a guest co-host today. Congressman Mike Levin is here with some reports from D.C. where things are normal and not at all very interesting. He was supposed to bring a hot take, and he says he did. So we'll get into that. Jakob did a story this week about how some classrooms in local colleges are filled with fake people. We'll break down how that works and how much it's costing. And we have more trash talk. The new fee for San Diego homeowners is probably coming, but it's got to go through a big hurdle first. Stay with us.
And we have some big news in beer. To celebrate our 20th anniversary, we have collaborated with Three Punk Ales, Chula Vista's Three Punk Ales, to create a limited edition Voice of San Diego beer can. Come enjoy a beer with all of our reporters at the official launch party. That's on Thursday, April 24th at 5 p.m. at Three Punk Ales on 259 3rd Avenue in Chula Vista. Once again, that's Thursday, April 24th at 5 p.m. at Three Punk Ales in Chula Vista.
Have you tried it, Jacob?
I have tried it.
It's good, right?
Yeah, it is quite good.
Good. Yes. And this week we have our big membership push beginning. We need to get 100 new members and $150,000 by April 29th. All gifts will be matched thanks to a generous group of Voice supporters. Donate at VOSD.org/podpeople. That's VOSD.org/podpeople. And of course, you can leave a message about why you support Voice, and we'll read some of our favorites on the next episode. I'm joined in the studio, as always, by managing editor Andrea Lopez Villafana. What's up, Lopez?
Whoa, what's up, Lewis? I like how you said my name.
Do you?
That was nice.
Yeah, good. And also the beer promo, of course, came from the dulcet tones of our Jakob McQuinney. What's up, Jakob?
Hey, Scott.
And joining us this week as a sort of co-host, as we've been doing, Congressman Mike Levin. Hello, sir. How are you?
Scott, I'm great. It's good to be anywhere but Washington, D.C. right now.
We're going to get into why that is, but you were just telling us about some news. You have secured the lease or helped secure the lease of San Onofre State Park. So we actually rent that. The state rents that from the government. And you're going to go by and cut a ribbon for a new extension of it?
I assume there will be ribbons. There will probably be a very large pair of scissors and speeches. It'll be great. But, this is a long time coming, and it's a 25-year renewal of the state park and state beach at San Onofre. And it happened after about 3 years of negotiations between the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the state of California. So it's a great win for the community and for all involved.
Yeah, big fan of that area, so good job on doing that. That's nice. We wrote about that. It was a little precarious because we had like a $1 lease for a while.
Yep.
And the feds are like, no, you got to pay more than that now.
Well, the law changed a number of years ago, Scott, where you can't have a federal piece of land go to any other government entity without fair market value. And so in this case, very expensive piece of oceanfront property, the value is in the tens of millions of dollars. So the state had to figure out how to offer an in-kind to the federal government, and they did that both with investments in energy projects on bases like Camp Pendleton, and also with the opportunities for training for Marines and sailors and others on parts of state property. So we're super excited. It was not an easy negotiation. A lot of good people were involved, and we're very grateful.
Well, it's a beautiful plot of land. Obviously, there's a campground there. But it's famous for its big, slow rolling waves, a longboarder's dream, and it's always busy, no matter what time of year it is.
Do you go surfing there?
I've been there 3 times. It's wonderful each time, but it's always very busy. So they're probably not going to be happy if you take up too many parking spots. But I'm sure they'll be happy they can still surf there.
Totally. Well, a lot of controversial issues. A lot of people get upset at me for different things, but you don't want to get the surfers mad. That's all I will say.
Well, speaking of, I'm interested in your take on this about politicians and such. So Nora Vargas, of course, vanished from public life. She was the county supervisor, recently reelected, just didn't take her oath of office for her second term. She posted a public post on LinkedIn today saying, with a claim, she said that reporters outrageously showed up at her house, waited for me until I arrived, harassing me in front of my 12-year-old niece. This isn't journalism. It's intrusive and harassment. As a private citizen, I have rights. I was blindsided. Now, a lot of us have been dying to talk to her. This is her first public statement of any significance since she vanished and just said she couldn't do it because of personal safety issues. So we don't know. We're curious what they were asking her about, and it seems like it might have had to do with the fact that lawsuit that was threatened from the former county registrar of voters, Michael Vu, and his concern that he wasn't considered for the top job at the county because of his race. That lawsuit's actually going forward, you said?
Yeah, it's going forward. We knew that it was sort of happening, but it's officially going forward, and he has named both the county and Nora Vargas, as well as County Supervisor Tara Lawson-Remer in his lawsuit.
Okay, so a couple issues here. So there's this phenomenon that's been growing over the last, I think, 10 years or whatever since Trump was elected or before that, whereas there's a scandalization occurring of just kind of normal journalistic practices, like talking with sources or asking for documents, or in many cases showing up at people's homes. That's kind of like a standard reporter practice. If they're not calling you back, you have an obligation not to surprise a source or somebody with your story, but also to try to get their perspective. Now, TV guys, they obviously push that a little bit much sometimes when they're like, "Good, what's your comment?" You're chasing them down, ambushing them, as it's called.
Which they have done that to her. Remember when she didn't attend, or she left a meeting early because she went to a Padres game, and then she was walking somewhere, and there was this clip of her being followed by a cameraman, and he was asking her questions.
Right, that's right, and she did not like that.
So maybe it's a little bit of trauma.
Yeah. So, but I got to say, going to somebody's house is not itself intrusion, breaking of private property right. I bet her as a candidate has gone to several homes and gone to the door, right? That's a pretty common practice. So I'm curious, do you go to people's houses all the time?
I do. You never came to my house, though, Scott. I mean, I'm feeling left out here.
I'm not good at the ambush. I send people to people's houses, but I've actually gone a few times and tried to check up on something. But
it's usually the final thing, right? You have sent an email, you've made a phone call, maybe you've even sent a message on social media and the person has ignored you, and finally your editor says, you need to try your best to reach to this person and make sure they know that you're writing the story.
Yeah, I've been told to go to somebody's house by our lawyer, who said, you need to do this or else we can't really publish the story.
Right.
So it is interesting the way in which kind of tactics that were viewed as just part of being a dogged reporter are now very different in the social media age, where people have different expectations of privacy, have different expectations of all sorts of things. And part of the thing that's ironic is that we have so much less privacy than we used to.
Yeah.
But there are some folks who, apparently like Nora, who expect even more than was kind of standard for somebody who is pseudo in the public in the past. And her being a private citizen, that's a fairly recent development.
Well, it's worth noting, at least she meant, we don't know if this is true or not, but at least she writes in this post that they did not contact her via email or phone for a comment.
Got it.
So who knows?
Well, we'll all stay posted. There's no more lasting question in San Diego politics than what happened. Why did she quit so suddenly? We never were able to verify any particular direct threat that she received, or what she was referring to when she was talking about personal safety concerns. And now, the future of the county truly is at stake. There's a Republican running who has a shot of winning. There's a Democrat who has a shot of winning. It could go very different ways. I assume you're supporting the Democrat, Paloma Aguirre, or
yes, I endorse Paloma straight away. I'm a big fan of hers and the work, particularly that she's done around the Tijuana River Valley crisis that I've been involved in for a number of years. So I'm all in.
There is a surge of, it seems like, local politicians taking it on. Your counterpart now in the race for your reelection, Jim Desmond, who's running against you, he's taking it on as a big thing recently. Yeah, it's awakened in a way. It's a lot of us who've been following it for decades, literally, are oh, welcome, interesting.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a polarizing issue. everybody hates sewage and the smell of garbage, and so if you can say, hey, I think it's bad that there's garbage in the water, you're not taking a controversial stance.
It is, and especially with the foreign power in charge of it.
I do think that it's nice that people like Jim are now interested in this issue. We both have been elected officials the same number of years, him in the county and me in Congress. And we've been working on this since I got to Congress. And what's interesting is in 2019 and 2020, we worked with the first Trump administration on the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement, which at the time they said was the greatest trade agreement ever. Obviously, now they don't feel that way.
USMCA, I like to call it.
So, as part of that, we were able to secure $300 million to help double the capacity of the South Bay wastewater treatment plant. Then both the Trump administration and the Biden administration took way too long, way too many excuses to not get
I
shovels
swear I
in the
heard
ground.
about that $300 million like every few months. It'd be like, oh, we got the $300 million. Was it the same or not? So then there was another $300 million, right?
Yeah, so what wound up happening is the current capacity of the plant's 25 million gallons per day. It needs to be probably double or triple that. And they also, what they didn't say back in 2019 or 2020 was that the plant was in a complete state of disrepair because the operations and maintenance hadn't been done consistently since the 90s. But in getting that $300 million, we were also able to push the Mexican government to contribute $144 million to clean up their San Antonio de los Buenos plant, which is on their side.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened but for our side getting the $300 million as part of USMCA. And that was a bipartisan deal. Kevin Faulconer worked on that at the time. Jared Kushner worked on it at the time. And
Kevin Faulconer, to his eventual demise, went to the president's office, took a picture with him during those discussions, and that picture was not
correct.
Not something he wanted to see more
I think
of.
The problem I have is when you've got people who are just simply new to this issue who pretend that they're the experts.
Yeah.
Lee Zeldin now saying that, boy, this is a problem we weren't aware of. Well, maybe he should have spoken to the EPA in the first Trump administration.
I've noticed that. So you're talking about the EPA director, and he has been making a lot of comment, which is great that he's like thinking about the sewage crisis, but it's the same thing we were talking about, like scandalizing or like emphasizing something that like has become routine for us, which sometimes you need an outsider to do, by the way. Like you sometimes need somebody to come in with fresh eyes and say, boy, that is messed up. Like you guys are like living with something you shouldn't be. But he does seem to like be like, oh, they're going to dump 6 million gallons. Yeah, bro, that's like Tuesday. It's like sorry. I see. I'm glad that you're outraged about it.
And this is not new. If you had Paloma here or Serge Dedina, who was mayor there for a long time, they will tell you this has been a problem for many, many years. And, fundamentally, we've got the money to fix it, and we've got to get shovels in the ground. And so I worry that with the Trump administration, the way they're cutting funding left and right for every agency, that they're going to put those funds at risk. And I worry when uninformed people say that we need to shut the border down with Mexico, because what that will mean is, roughly a quarter of our GDP in Southern California is directly related to cross-border trade. So I think we have to be very careful here. I personally think that it can get done. It will get done. It doesn't mean that things have gone exactly as planned, but it certainly isn't for my lack of effort. And it's nice that others are now interested in participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So on Monday, the San Diego City Council set a date in June for an important hearing about the trash fee that we've been talking about. Again, quick reminder, about half of San Diego residents have to pay a private hauler to come take their trash from their multifamily condo units or whatever, sometimes some private streets. Most of them are multifamily unit people who dwell in those units. The other side of San Diego, single-family homeowners and renters in single-family homes do not have to pay a special fee for trash collection. It's the only city in California that doesn't have a special fee for that. 2 years ago, they said, voters said, you could charge a fee. The city said that fee would probably be about $25 a month. The mayor came back a few months ago and said, well, it's actually going to be about $50 a month. And everybody's like, what happened to the 25? They said, okay, fine. We'll do 47. So now,
is this how they get me though? Like when there's a sale on something,
right?
I'm like, 47, gotta buy it.
15% off.
Whoa.
So a couple of things interesting at the debate. They had to have the hearing in the San Diego Civic Center Theater because there was an earthquake. By the way, that was fun.
Did you feel it?
I love earthquakes. They're strong enough to roll a little bit with you, but don't do anything significant. That was fun, right?
I was at the dentist
Oh,
And,
that's not a good time.
and he had the sharp instrument, and we started rocking and rolling. And I said,
Let's
get
hold off.
the sharp instrument
Get away from
That's
my
literally
face.
one of like the 5 things you don't want to be doing in a like 5-point earthquake, right?
Yeah, the other thing was I can see the construction workers who are building
Yeah.
that big building across from us.
They
And
were, like, holding
during
on.
the earthquake, I like looked over and my blinds were, moving all crazy. But then I see like all these little people on the very top of that building,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
what is happening? Those poor people."
Well,
up
I think
there."
the one place you really wouldn't want to be during an earthquake is San Diego City Hall.
Yeah.
And they did clear it out for the day. And you could tell they were like, boy, we need to inspect it. You can tell they were kind of like goosing that a little bit. Like, oh, it's I don't know if you've heard, but this is a building that's a little shaky, but we're going to check it out. And that's why we're going to move the city council hearing. So they have the hearing at the Civic Theater. And at the theater, they have this discussion about this trash fee. Now, because there's one interesting fact about the trash fee, which is it's going to be on property tax bills. So it's not going to be like a water bill that goes to your home as a separate, envelope and such. It's going on your property tax, which means like, as one of the city council members said, so if you don't pay it, like you could lose your house. Like it's like that significant. So
Yeah.
to go through that process and as a process as a fee, they have to go through this like really rigorous official noticing things like, hey, this fee is going up and it's going to be in your property tax bills and all that stuff. So that's why they have to have this hearing on June 9th. So they have to. The other thing that's interesting, they have to have 6 votes to pass the fee. There's 6 of 9 city council members, and they got 6 votes to put the hearing on. But one of the votes, Henry Foster, one of the yes votes, said, "I'm not going to support this if it doesn't go down a lot." Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting because the mayor just released his budget. Yesterday, the day before, and it's got significant cuts in there, but it depends on that fee being where they set it at that $47. Right. Also, it can be lower, $47 at the highest, $42 with a smaller bin, and then $36 with a smaller bin.
Right, if the homeowner's like, "Hey, I don't need that big of a bin."
But they will sign you up for the highest one first, and you have to proactively opt out of it, and then they'll like credit your account or whatever.
Which is always a great and easy process.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I think the weird, so they're going to give you a big bin and then come and get the bin and give you a smaller bin?
That seems like a waste of time, but I'm just saying.
Well, so they are counting on that money. So anything that they decide to take off that fee is they're going to have to make up in the budget. And they've already like hit their limit on what kind of fees they seem to want to do. So they are going to eliminate, I think it was like 160 positions that are filled with people. And so that's, those folks will have a chance to take other empty positions at the city if there are any that qualify. But that's the closest they've come to layoffs since 2008, I think. And so I'll be interested to see how that goes. But again, they're cutting rec center hours, they're cutting library hours, they're boosting the fire department budget.
And police.
What's that?
And police.
And police, yeah, which make up the bulk of the city's budget. So I think that it's going to be a really interesting time for the city. But that fee, I don't know if it's going to be an easy process for them in the next couple of months. So
yeah, I was really struggling to listen into that city council meeting because again, they had transitioned from City Hall to the theater, and it was like just on Zoom, and so any council member who wasn't really close just sounded terribly muffled. But the next day, I read in the UT that there was someone, I believe, from the independent budget analyst office.
Oh yeah, he said he's sorry.
He said he apologized because he was the one responsible for that lower estimate, and that was really interesting.
So it wasn't just a report where he said like, "Hey, it's going to be $25." It was like the ballot pamphlet that they sent out to people. It said it's going to be like $24 to $28 a month. And now he's like, sorry, mea culpa. I think he actually said mea culpa.
Yeah.
But like,
I'm human.
Yeah, I am.
I am human.
I'm trying my best. It's like
I'm just living life.
I get it, man. I get it. But that's a big like.
I'm human is not what you want to be hearing from your budget analyst.
I kind of think that if you say in the ballot it's going to be $25, you kind of just have to go with that, right? Like there's really there's nothing more like there's no core trust relationship in a democracy than that moment, right? That this is what it's going to do. And so I hope they figure that out because it is causing some outrage.
And that's the point that some of the council members made, right? Like this is what we told voters, this is what they approved, and now we're coming at them with this higher fee.
And to your point, Scott, famously, politicians always accomplish everything on their platform.
No comment.
It was a ballot measure, not a politician. But yeah, gotcha. And there was a garbage fire last week. Just as we talked about this,
Another one?
somebody threw away something they weren't supposed to. So when they have these trucks that start on fire, they have to dump all the garbage in the middle of the street, let the fire go, put it out, and then put all the garbage back in. That happened again. And again, remember, they're going to put a chip in your bin so that they know if you were the one that threw away the lithium battery. What I haven't got the answer on is what happens if they do identify that you put the lithium battery in. Like,
how excited do you think city officials were when they got that call? They have like a single phone that's reserved for garbage fires. They're like, we gotta report this right now.
There's a garbage fire team.
Yeah.
Call the garbage.
It's the
fire.
garbage fire social media
Maybe
team.
they just come to your house and scare you.
Yeah. Where you actually live in Oceanside, right?
No,
Or-
I live up in San Juan Capistrano.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so Orange County cities pay a little bit more on garbage fees. Do you know what you pay?
I pay plenty. Yeah, we have CR&R up there, and we pay probably about $30-$40 a month.
And but not on your property tax bill.
No, we get a bill.
You get a trash bill.
Yep, every other month. I think it's about $75.
Got it. Learn something new every day.
Okay.
All right. So speaking of the county too, the one of the budget items in there is that the county and the city are at a sort of standoff about that sprung structure tent in the Midway area that the county, is not going to support the way that the city wants them to support or whatever. So there's hundreds of people there whose future I think is in trouble now if the city and the county can't make a deal about who's going to fund and who's going to take care of the utilities for that. And Lisa wrote about that. She's following a lot of these things as well. Did you notice anything else in the state of the county speech that Tara Lawson-Remer made? There was a little controversy, a little scandal that she hadn't invited the two Republicans to the State of the County speech. She said that, or her office said that she did invite them, but that the county council told them that would be a Brown Act violation, which is like maybe something they should have worked out and noticed the meeting as a special meeting. Maybe she didn't want to have them there. What's the latest on that?
I don't know. I mean, they weren't there, and that's as much as.
Yeah, they're scandalized.
I
Right?
know. I asked Lisa. I was like, this feels like they could have avoided this situation here.
Yeah.
I mean, just at the mayor's state of the city, all the council members were there. Like, they clearly figured it out.
Oh, I just got a note from Lisa saying that Joel Anderson is crafting a statement because he says he was not invited at all. Oof. But she had a lot in there. She wants to resist, right? She wants to set the county up to be able to resist what the Trump administration plans. The county is probably, aside from the universities, the agency most vulnerable to some of these federal cuts. Are we going to see any of this slow down? Or are we just starting at the beginning of all these potential cuts?
Well, I wish I knew. My crystal ball as it pertains to this administration is pretty cloudy, but what we saw at the beginning was Republicans in Congress that have the power of the gavels and we in Congress that have the power of the purse. Unfortunately, the Republicans decided to give all that power away to the administration on both appropriations and on the programs that really matter to people. And ultimately, a lot of that money does go to counties, just like San Diego County. And then what happened is Trump gave a lot of that authority to Elon Musk, to this new Doge destruction of government by Elon, or whatever you want to call it. And, they basically are gutting programs from within. And the idea there is, these are fundamentally people that do not believe in the power of government to help people's lives. They would rather have more tax cuts for their buddies rather than any sort of decent services for people who really need the help. And the very cynical bet, Scott, is that those most vulnerable in our society are least able to fight back.
Yeah, so let me ask you about that. So one of the biggest chunks of federal funding that people are worried about is the Medicaid. So in San Diego, Medi-Cal, about 1 million people in San Diego County depend on Medi-Cal for their health insurance, and the budget I think that was proposed has a, what, $800 billion cut in Medi-Cal, which I think would be huge for at-home care providers and all kinds of people who depend on Medi-Cal here. So help us understand what is exactly the process. Where is that $800 million cut outlined? What would have to happen for that to go through? And is that something that the president can just do?
So there's a process called budget reconciliation. So once a year, basically, the Republicans, in this case, can come together, House and Senate, and try to propose one bill. We did it as Democrats with what was called the Inflation Reduction Act. We did it the year before with what was called the American Rescue Plan.
It just has to pay for itself, right? It can't cause debt or something?
There's some sleight of hand that they're trying to move forward, where they're saying that the Trump tax cuts are expiring, but they are current policy.
Yeah.
So they're trying to just basically, through smoke and mirrors, not count the $4 to $5 trillion in additional debt that will be accrued if those tax cuts continue. But what they're asking to do is cut $1.5 trillion in federal spending in order to pay for these at least partially pay for these tax cuts. And when you break down committee by committee how they're intending to get to $1.5 trillion, $880 billion of it comes from the committee responsible for Medicaid. And so, basically all that spending that they're talking about cutting would have to come from Medicaid. When you look at what it would actually mean, it would reduce what's called FMAP, which is the percentage that the federal government matches in terms of state funding. So for Medi-Cal, the state comes up with half, the feds come up with half, every state in the union. And what this would mean is that, practically speaking, nursing homes would be forced to close. Hospitals, particularly hospitals that are already struggling in San Diego County and elsewhere, would have real problems with regard to wait times or services available. It means 1 in 10 veterans is on Medi-Cal in California. It means that a lot of veterans aren't going to have the health care that they need. And, it's as I see it, incredibly cruel and really wrong-headed. And I've tried to remind my Republican colleagues that a lot of the rural districts that they represent will be even more impacted than some of the suburban and urban districts, like ours here in San Diego. And they get that, but at the end of the day, they have maybe 20 or 30 really extreme people, the Freedom Caucus, and they have a very narrow majority. They only have a 4-seat majority in the House. And, they basically are making a bet that rather than work in good faith with Democrats, they would rather try to pass a bill all by themselves. And the threat of crossing Donald Trump as this big, as Trump calls it, big, beautiful bill. I think it's a big bill. That is true. It's not so beautiful. But as that process moves forward, they don't want to cross the president and his agenda.
So what is the timeline looking like? And this is something you said they can do on their own.
They can. They can do it with a simple majority vote once a year in the House and the Senate. And, they have a very narrow majority in the House and they have a 53-47 in the Senate. But for that budget reconciliation process, that once a year process, they would need 60 votes in the Senate. And, obviously there aren't 7 Democrats that are going to support blowing a hole in Medicaid and destroying people's health care.
Mm-hmm. And so this is something, what's the timeline look like in the next few months?
Yeah, it's in the next few months. The big forcing factor is what they call the X state. So that's when the debt limit comes due. That's the other piece of this is, in order to pay for all this, they have to increase our nation's ability to borrow. We currently have about $36 trillion in debt. They want to increase that roughly to 41 or 42 trillion. And in fact, if you look at the Trump agenda, they're talking 50 to 60 trillion dollars by the end of the decade on the basis of all the different things they want to do that are just going to continue to raise the debt and be a burden for, future generations. There are, I think, fiscally responsible Republicans that are still around. I just can't find them. The ones that are in charge seem not to care very much. And it's a very weird situation when you have those of us in the Democratic Party who are more concerned about deficits and debt than Republicans.
We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. So one area of federal funding is like federal student aid and Pell Grants and such. Jakob has a great story put out this week. I've been working on it for a few weeks, and I really enjoyed it. It was about how some folks are abusing that system and creating bots that are filling up classrooms virtually, but not actually with actual students. What did you find, and what's going on?
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy thing that's going on here. Essentially, ever since the pandemic forced community colleges, well, all schools, but this is a trend that's specifically taking place at community colleges. Ever since the pandemic forced them online, the number of students taking virtual classes has exploded. What community colleges have also found is that the number of fraudulent students enrolled in those classes has also exploded. And so while it's called a bot crisis, that bot name is a little bit of a misnomer, because these are real people who are often operating these kind of networks of fake accounts that generally come from stolen identities. This isn't necessarily as if they are creating new people out of nowhere. In order to get financial aid, they have to sign the FAFSA student aid form. And when they do that, checks are produced that show whether or not the social security number they enter match the date of birth and other identification of students. And so to get through that check process, they essentially have to use the information of real people. And so these fraudsters essentially have stolen people's identity and are signing up for financial aid and then enrolling in community colleges. And the crisis is acute at community colleges because they are the institution of higher education that accepts everybody and is supposed to help everybody gain an education. And then from there, they essentially just steal the financial aid that they receive.
You were describing one teacher who was excited because her class was filled and found out like the vast majority of the students were not real.
Yeah, so she had 2 classes. She was a professor at Southwestern College. 2 of her classes were completely full, including having the wait lists completely full, and that had never happened before. And so she was stoked, right? I mean, she described that teachers get really excited when they see that their classes are in demand. But after about 2 weeks, she had determined through a whole variety of factors that the vast majority of these people, of the over 100-something folks who were either enrolled or on the wait list, were in fact not real people, but were these fraudsters. And by about 2 weeks into the semester, she had gone from around 115 students either enrolled or on the wait list down to 15, which is just obviously a shocking decrease. And the problem has only been getting worse. Over the past couple of years, there have been tens of millions stolen in state and federal funding up and down California. And for a while there, in the 2022, 2023 kind of era, the crisis kind of entered a bit of a lull. But then come 2024, with the kind of rise of these large language models, these generative AI platforms, all of a sudden these fraudsters had a new and very, very powerful weapon, because part of this is, you don't just enroll in classes and all of a sudden get showered in financial aid. You have to stick around for a couple weeks, and then oftentimes there's a second dispersal of financial aid near the end of the semester. And so these fraudsters essentially had to figure out how to stick around in these classes long enough to get either one or both of those dispersals. And by 2022, 2023, teachers had caught on, administrators had caught on, and sort of dropped these folks quicker. But with the creation of generative AI platforms, all of a sudden they were able to use these things to do the classwork of like 60 different identities that they've created to enroll students. And it's not only created a nightmare for teachers who now are having to do this like Blade Runner, AI detection, but it's also had an impact on students and people whose identities are literally being stolen. I spoke to a couple administrators. Well, one teacher said that, at a certain point he got curious why there were people just not submitting classwork, and so he called one of the students, and the student was like, I went to Southwestern 2 years ago, but I moved to Pennsylvania now, and I'm like going to a 4-year university. There was another, I spoke to an administrator at San Diego Community College District, and he spoke to a student called the district and said, yeah, I'm trying to enroll in this college, but they're saying that I have like a financial aid application open at your college. I don't even live in California. Like, what's going on here? And so it's throwing up all of these barriers. It's making teachers' lives more difficult. It's making it much more difficult for students to even get into classes, because many of these classes are filled to the brim with these fake students who are bilking, state and federal funds. So it's not very good.
Yeah. Well, we run into this a lot with federal funding, right? There is always going to be some level of fraud, and I think that if you use something like that and say like, well, then cut it all off, then you're hurting people who might depend on it. On the other hand, that's pretty bad. So how do you navigate this on the federal level, where you want to be able to suss out fraud or things that aren't working, but then you have this like sword of Damocles hanging over everything, where they want to cut and just cut and cut, or it's almost like they've set it up so they're going to cut everything, and then just whatever howls the most afterwards, they'll reinstate. Is that the feeling you're getting?
I think, Scott, you have to do it legally, ethically, and inclusively. So what I mean by that is, there are laws on the books, there are checks and balances, separation of powers. Congress really needs to play a role. We have oversight over how these funds are spent. For example, I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and my first meeting, I was grilling the Commanding General of the Army Corps of Engineers about dumping 2 billion gallons of water from Northern California, the president needed for a photo op to say he was doing something about the LA wildfires. That's one example. So you do have plenty of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. This is a really interesting story that you just shared. But where my head immediately goes is, let's see how we can, in good faith, try to identify the problems and try to work within the checks and balances that we have, and then ethically and inclusively come up with a solution to remedy the situation. That's very different from what President Trump has done with Elon Musk, where they've gone in and basically operated under the assumption that all federal agencies are bad, all federal workers are bad. Fire as many of them as you can, legally or not. Just go in and break stuff, and if in fact it's important enough, people will demand that it comes back. And what that led to was, for example, firing all the probationary employees across the federal government, which included probationary in the civil service includes when you just got promoted, right? So you had all these folks across the federal government doing an extremely good job that were fired by virtue of their doing a good job. So I think there's a healthy balance here where we could have, in good faith, worked with President Trump and worked with Republicans in Congress to find ways to crack down on fraud, on waste. And, if you want an example of a good way, or a better way anyway, in the early 90s, Al Gore and Bill Clinton had the Reinventing Government Initiative. And they got hundreds of thousands of federal workers to take an early buyout, but they did it in consultation with Congress. They reduced federal spending in many different agencies, and that eventually led to a balanced budget and a budget surplus in the ending years of the Clinton administration. So, the difference there is it was done with Congress, it was done ethically, and it was done inclusively with those people in government who want to see government succeed rather than see it fail. I see Elon Musk and others like him going into these different agencies with the intent of these agencies failing, to destroy them from within, whether it's Social Security or Medicaid or the VA. They want to destroy these government agencies from within.
You wrote on Musk's platform on X, your pinned X post or tweet, I guess now, it's this: DOJ just shut down San Diego County's wastewater testing system. No more research or monitoring for deadly diseases, despite the critical role wastewater surveillance played in fighting COVID. Now, the more that I look back at COVID and the more I look back at what we did during COVID, the more I'm less sort of like happy with it. I'm not saying people like made wrong decisions then during the fog of what we were dealing with. I understand a lot of them, but it seems like we could take a lot of lessons of like suppressing the virus didn't work. The vaccine worked. Holding the virus or trying to suppress it didn't seem to. And I look back at that wastewater stuff in a similar vein. I don't know that it really played that great a role. Do you find yourself defending things that you wouldn't defend if it weren't for the fact that he's out there just mashing them?
Well, I'll defend the wastewater efforts because I thought it was crucially important that we understood the scope and the spread of the virus before we had the vaccine. And
right.
It took a while for us. It's very interesting that Trump actually, behind Operation Warp Speed, his administration got that vaccine out from both Pfizer, Moderna, and others, and they did it very quickly and very effectively, and it worked. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of people saying, at the time, don't take it, and the whole anti-vax thing, we can go down that rabbit hole. But before that, we were very much concerned, and we saw, death rates across the country that were very high. You had some people who were science deniers who said, for example, my opponent at the time, he said, there's only a few pure cases of COVID out there, and that's BS. I think people died because of COVID, lots of people. And, for me, it was a heartbreaking situation to have friends who were impacted, to have, constituents who were impacted, and we wanted every tool in the toolkit. So to cut that funding now because you don't like science, there's just a whole anti-science mentality. If you look at what the administration's doing to the NIH, that's so critically important to our region. When you think about medical research, that's going on at places like UC San Diego for cures of, trying to find cures for cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer's. I mean, there's just an anti-science bias, and I don't know what's behind it, whether they think that these universities are all just, big opposition power centers to the Trump agenda, but it's really hurting our economy and our innovation.
So for the leaders of the universities in San Diego, should they plan on massive reductions to their federal funding? Should they just assume that's the case, or can you and others stop that?
Well, we're going to try to stop what the Trump administration is doing. At the end of the day, the Congress has the power of the purse. We appropriate funds and we authorize programs.
Do you, though?
Absolutely, we do.
I mean, I know that's the case, but
no.
Is he really proving that you actually can't control it?
The President of the United States apportions the funds that have been appropriated by the Congress. What he is doing, if he's withholding those funds, is illegal. It violates the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. Nixon tried the same, and the Supreme Court decided 7-2 that what he was doing was wrong, and that pales in comparison to what Trump is doing. So the Supreme Court is going to rule eventually on impoundment. They're also going to rule on something called the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is basically when the president decides to spend money the Congress has not appropriated, which he's doing as well. It's all illegal, it's all wrong, and it's all part of a bigger 50,000-foot objective, which is to dismantle the federal government from within or to consolidate power. In any event, it's wrong, it's unconstitutional. Even my Republican colleagues, many of them behind closed doors, know it's wrong, but they're afraid. Many of them just don't want to speak out.
But if the Supreme Court says, yeah, this is wrong, what happens?
I think that, notwithstanding the horrible situation going on with Abrego Garcia and the opposition to that court order, that if you have a majority of the Supreme Court decide that the Trump administration is acting illegally, either in withholding federal money that's been appropriated or spending money that hasn't been appropriated, I think, at some point they will abide by those court orders. I sure hope they will. I think it's directly related to the president's approval rating. And I say that because if Republican members of Congress see the president as politically vulnerable, if they see themselves as politically vulnerable, I think they're more willing to stand up and do what they know to be right. As it stands, the president, as of this recording, is at 42% approval. His strongest approval ratings historically have been on the economy. The tariffs have blown a hole in that approval. He's now upside down there. He's sinking fast on his immigration policies with forced deportation of people who are in the country legally. And I think, ultimately courage will come as the president's popularity declines.
I think that's putting a lot of faith in a group of people that haven't necessarily demonstrated that they're worthy of that faith. I mean, what do you genuinely think? There's been a lot of talk from folks who say, there's going to be a constitutional crisis. We're not there yet. Projecting out.
Oh, we're there. No, we're there.
Well, when the rubber meets the road, what happens? If Trump and his administration ignore court orders, which they are already doing, and continue to do that, what realistically can Democratic politicians like you do?
Well, let me take a step back. So with regard to whether Republican members of Congress will stand against this president, I had a political science professor 25, 30 years ago who said something that stuck with me all these years, which is that the number one thing that members of Congress care about is getting elected and reelected. And I thought that was very cynical at the time, but and it's not necessarily true for me. I think that there are other more important things in life, like having values and wanting to get things done and serving a cause greater than yourself. There are any number of ways to do that. But I do believe that for a lot of members of Congress, they do look at the number one thing as getting elected and reelected. And if they see the president as a liability, a political liability, then you will see a lot more people speaking out against the more egregious policies, whether it's the tariff policies or the immigration policies. As it stands, President Trump just won an election in November, and you have to remember that the Republican Party was doing an autopsy as recently as 2012. After the 2012 election, when President Obama beat Romney, there was a belief that the Republican Party could never win a national election, couldn't win young people, couldn't win Latinos, couldn't win African Americans. President Trump won a greater share of all those groups, particularly young men, young Latino men, African American men. And I think a lot of people that are elected on the Republican side, they see his strategy as a winning strategy, and they're going to go along with MAGA so long as it benefits them politically. As soon as they think it won't benefit them politically, that Trump becomes a bigger liability than asset, then you will see their courage grow. What was the second part of the?
The second part of the question is, what if that's not true?
I think it is true. I think fundamentally, a lot of my colleagues are pretty cynical, just to be honest with you. And I will speak with them behind closed doors and then, see them on TV, and it's like a fundamentally different person.
But being cynical doesn't mean you have a backbone.
Well, I think if it's politically advantageous for them to show a backbone or to demonstrate independence from Trump, they will.
When you run for re-election, Jim Desmond's running, do you think that Trump will be an asset or a hindrance? I'm sure you'll say it's a hindrance, but like you said just a few months ago, it felt different, like something had really shifted. What could you say that that will be a big problem for him?
Well, I think it would have been a problem for Democrats if the president had governed, or it would govern the way he campaigned. So he campaigned on lowering costs, for example. He said, I'm going to take care of inflation. I'm going to fix the war in Ukraine in a day. He made all these incredible promises. And President Trump has been pretty effective at diagnosing problems facing our country, whether it was inflation or immigration. He spoke to a lot of people who felt left out or left behind. And I just disagree with his prescription for any of those problems. And what did he do on costs? He immediately, got us into this trade war, and costs will go up. I'm hearing from local business owners who are telling me that they're going to have to charge double for their products. I'm hearing from, the American car manufacturers who are furious that the Japanese and Korean car companies are now going to have to pay fewer tariffs than American companies like GM. And I just think it's a betrayal of what he campaigned on. And so I see, that's a long answer to say I see him as a significant liability for the Republicans. But we have to have a positive agenda too, Scott. We can't just talk reflexively about Trump. I think it's important that we have big ideas around housing and healthcare and clean energy and gun violence prevention and how we're going to modernize the VA without gutting it and et cetera.
To me, it feels like there's kind of three giant things, and they're very different, and he's tackling them all. So it's just such an overwhelming show of force on each one. But the one is like trade and the economy, obviously the tariffs and all that stuff going on. The other is this vast sort of re-examination or just gutting of government and the funding that's being stopped and threatened, and using that leverage to try to force institutions to comply. And then the third is this, and I think it's kind of broken into both immigration and like just authoritarian, instincts, where they're like, they do want to use these sort of random extreme situations to try to consolidate authoritarian power, to try to really make it so that they can, take people if they want, make it hard for or otherwise, otherwise threaten the civil liberties of folks and due process that helps us protect those civil liberties. Now, you're a lawyer. You followed all that. When you're looking at those vast areas, it feels like Democrats are like looking at each and they're like whack-a-mole, like trying to like address each one of those, and they can't stand out on any of them. They can't seem to like find anything to really reframe any of those discussions. And in fact, it just feels like they're chasing each one down this like this spiral that he controls the whole time. Do you feel that? And how real is it that core fear that he will ignore Supreme Court, that his backers will go along with him all the way down, and that we will see a remodeling of America where one man is in charge. He decides how rulings go. He decides who goes to jail. He decides who stays. He decides who gets tariff breaks and who doesn't. Like he runs everything. Is that a fear you see and that could happen?
Well, let me unpack a little bit of that in saying that anytime you have the president, the House, the Senate, all of one party, they're going to dominate the narrative and they're going to control the news cycle. And this president is, incredibly skilled at dominating the news cycle. And it's not that things don't stick to him. I used to say Clinton was like Teflon. I think everything sticks to Trump. It's just we forgot yesterday's outrage because there's a new one today. And trying to compete with that, I think, would be a fool's errand. But pointing out the most damaging aspects and how it impacts real people, I think, is really important. And then trying to shift, I give the Trump campaign credit in that they shifted to, from legacy media to new and alternative forms of media, podcasts and so forth. Throughout the final months of the campaign, I spoke with a ton of undecided voters, some of whom had voted for me in the past, others who had not. And I was astonished how many of them were getting their news and information from TikTok, Instagram, Joe Rogan. I mean, this was very new, and the media landscape has shifted dramatically. So part of combating how they're flooding the zone is figuring out not only what we focus on, but where. And that's really tough. And it's something that we think through and that we do our best at every single day. And you have to be everywhere. I know that, people listening to this or watching this, that represents a little slice, and then you have to go to different outlets that each of which will have a little bit different impact, and then you talk about it on your social media. That'll have a different impact. This is a new media landscape that we have to embrace, and we're behind. I think Media Matters recently did a survey of influencers and creators on social media platforms, and they found roughly 3/4 of them are right-leaning. And so, we're several years behind. And, all we can do, though, is, keep telling the truth. That's one thing. I will not embrace the tactic of just disinformation or just exaggerating or demonizing people. Unfortunately, the body politic follows the discourse and the mentality of the leader. And there's such a divisiveness, a polarization, a mean-spiritedness in a lot of our political discourse, and it starts from the top. And I'm going to just do everything I can every day to fight against it.
So ever since Trump entered the scene, I think Democrats have kind of played into his hand in a way, which is they have reflexively kind of got into the defensive crouch behind institutions that I think a lot of Americans feel have failed them for their whole lives. And being the party of, nothing will fundamentally change because we want to protect these institutions that have, in some cases, not impacted you, in some cases people feel have made their lives worse, is inevitably a losing gambit. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you think Democrats need to have something that they stand for and not just define themselves in oppositional terms. When you look forward, what does that look like for you? What are the big things that you think Democrats should be running on? Because people voted for Trump because he was a radical change. There is I think, a mood in this country that wants radical change because things have been the same for far too long, and they're sick of it.
Well, high level, I think it's about telling the truth and having integrity. I still think those are values that matter, that I try to raise my kids to tell the truth and have integrity. And I think people are still yearning for that. At least maybe I'm naive, but I sure hope they are. But in terms of best preparing the United States and our economy for the future, making sure that we have ethical AI policies, for example, to talk about your earlier story, making sure that we've got the energy grid of the future, that we can actually handle all the clean energy that we're going to need for AI and for everything else. I have the bill in the House on that, on transmission modernization. Healthcare, knowing that we're either going to further expand the Affordable Care Act and have I would like to see an early buy-in for Medicare, for example. I'd like to see an expansion into dental, vision, and hearing. As we try to think about Social Security, I want to strengthen that program rather than gut it from within. We can do it if we had a system where people at the very top of the income spectrum paid the same amount in as a percentage to Social Security. You could have that program solvent through the end of the century. I think for veterans, it's about modernizing the VA rather than privatizing it. On guns, it's about universal background checks. And, if we can't get an assault weapons ban, at least we can try to ban things like ghost guns and work on things like safe storage. And it's democracy. And look, a lot of consultants and pundits say, don't talk about democracy for its own sake. Okay, well, let's talk about it in terms of anti-corruption. I'm pushing very hard for a ban on members of Congress from trading stock. I'm pushing for getting some of the dark money out of the political process, trying to have some sort of pilot program around public financing of campaigns. And at the end of the day, trying to protect our elections, make sure that if you're legally eligible to vote, that you can do so, not trying to undermine the right of people to vote, which is what the other side really is trying to do. So there are other issues too, but those are a few that come to mind. But I think it's important that we talk about those big ideas proactively and not just be reflectively against Trump all the time. And I worry that not enough of the narrative, even if we do talk about ideas like that, will break through because ultimately a lot of folks in your business, they just want engagement, they want eyeballs, they want clicks, and they want likes and retweets, reposts.
All we want is money.
All you want is money. So, a positive vision for the future doesn't necessarily sell.
Yeah.
Right? The last time I had the opportunity to speak with any reporter before this about a positive vision for the future, I could count it on one hand in the last 7 years. They always want you on to talk about whatever awful thing is happening.
Yeah. Well, it's time now for you to bring your hot take. We asked you to prepare one. I've got one too, since it's federal issues, but I'll let you go first.
Well, I represent North County.
Yes.
And if you have not been paying attention...
Let's do your district real quick.
Yes.
So it's North County, mostly North County, right?
Yeah, so it's Oceanside, Carlsbad, Vista, Encinitas, Solana Beach, Del Mar, and then it goes up past into Orange County with Camp Pendleton, and then San Clemente and San Juan Capistrano, Dana Point.
How do you identify?
I identify as a proud Californian.
No, California.
Listen, I was born and raised and grew up in OC, but I love North County. And my hot take is that North County will have more Michelin-starred restaurants than the rest of San Diego.
Oh,
yeah.
Fascinating.
And we already have 2. You should come check them out.
All right. Do you want my hot take?
I want your hot take.
So there's all this talk about voter ID, right? Do you have a take on voter ID? Like it obviously the amount of voter fraud that exists is documented to be very low.
Yeah.
But it's an issue that sticks in people's heads. Like It's like, why wouldn't you? I have to show an ID to do X and Y, and like, why wouldn't I do that? And it's something I think that Democrats are losing on those things where it's hard to like understand why they would oppose that. And
I'd say the devil's in the details. The bill that they put up the other day on this was god awful.
What was that? The SAVE thing?
Yeah. And that would have precluded military personnel serving overseas from being able to vote.
Right.
It would have precluded some women who got married and changed their last names and couldn't provide their birth certificate from the right to vote. So the devil's in the details.
So my hot take is that the United States should have a national ID. Like it should be something that you're easy to get, like when you've turned 15 or whatever, like you get it. Like other countries have that, and for employment and for all kinds of educational. But the large opposition to that has usually been from the right, right? Like and even the real ID, it's supposed to be in effect in like 2 weeks, right? Like you can't take a plane without having like this special type of ID, the real ID, and so. What are we doing? Like, why can't we get, like, if there's going to be such an emphasis on voter ID, like, shouldn't ID be something that's like bigger deal? I think it's weird that they don't have it, but I think it would be fine. Now, usually there's a big push, but the real ID is getting a bunch of like right-wing conspiracy, even left-wing, like edgelord conspiracy theories about what's happening. But I think it's like, to me, it just makes sense. Like, if we're going to, especially for everything, for guns to universities to voting, it would help a lot.
I think you're right. And look, I think at the end of the day, you have Elon Musk and other people who are casting aspersions and, claiming that the reason that Democrats oppose a lot of these bills is because, we want people who are undocumented to vote. It's not true. I want everybody who's legally eligible to be able to vote as easily as possible. And I have great faith in the state of California and Dr. Weber that that's what we're going to do here in California. But I am worried about other states, and I have been following closely what's happening in North Carolina and some other states around this. And at the end of the day, it should not be controversial that we want people who are legally eligible to vote to do so. And, the unfortunate reality is, Elon has spread a lot of distrust. President Trump, maybe more than anybody else, has spread distrust about past elections. And, that's really unfortunate because at the end of the day, if you foment all this angst and distrust, that, ultimately leads to, I think just a far worse outcome for everyone to participate in the democratic process.
That's just wild to me, I gotta say, because like as an undocumented person, the last thing you would want to do is vote, like put down your information on something that you're not supposed to. Like anytime I filled out for a new ID or something, I was like, okay, I filled out not a citizen. Did I? Yes, I filled it out. Okay, because I don't want to get in trouble.
I think that's why like that perspective I think would be so much more helpful, because I think that so many of these debates, people imagine what they would do if they were like, I think that's in the whole debate about trans folks in sports, right? Like they're like, oh, I would, if I was if I'd do that, I would do that and go dominate a track meet. It's like, well, no, or you go look at somebody in the locker room or whatever. Like that's, you're you. Actual people have different perspectives about why they want to do different things. And like why would you want to expose yourself to the public system that could come down, especially as we see now? And that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I worry with all this that we are losing what made this country great to begin with. So I think about, my own grandparents, how they came as kids, and I wonder if their story would even be possible today. And when we see people being deported who are here, I just met yesterday with the daughter of a couple, Gladys and Nelson Gonzalez, constituents of mine, at least they used to be. They moved to the United States from Colombia in 1989. They got bad legal advice. Their lawyer wound up getting disbarred. They didn't have their paperwork filed properly. And every year they would go to ICE voluntarily, and they would get an exemption because of the improper counsel that they had received, until this past February when they were deported. These are people who never got so much as a traffic ticket. And they paid taxes all these years. They did everything the right way. They raised 3 kids. They have a new grandson that they haven't been able really to see. And it's just another example. Everybody's talking about Abrego Garcia because he was deported to a Salvadoran torture prison. But there are lots of others that are being deported wrongly. And you can make the case that the pendulum swung too far the other way under Biden. I did. I go down to the border every quarter and I see what's going on. And things were not good during the first couple of years of Biden. I think they got it, and by the end, things were much better. But now that pendulum has swung so far the other way, where immigrants are demonized and vilified, and you're told, as a undocumented worker to file your taxes and have a Social Security number. And now we're going to use all that against you. Now what the Trump administration wants to do. It's in my view, runs counter to everything this country stood for. And I don't know if I'd be here today.
Well, some of the scariest stuff happening is like a visiting student. They might have a resident card. They protested the war in Gaza, and they're being shipped off. Where do you stand on that? Should a university student be able to say the war in Gaza is wrong? We need to stop it, stop funding Israel, stuff like that.
The First Amendment's really important, and I wonder, all these people, the J.D. Vances of the world, were talking about cancel culture when they felt that a speech that they agreed with was being stifled. But when it's speech they don't agree with, they're, I guess, advocating for people to be deported. It doesn't ring well with me at all. And, I think that our local universities are doing a fine job from what I can tell in addressing all of this. I think it's pretty simple. If you're contributing positively to our society, to our economy, we want you to stay. We want you to create that next good company, whether, you're a student or whether you're an entrepreneur. And look, 1 out of every 5 service jobs in San Diego are from undocumented workers. So we just better be careful about the steps we're taking.
Well, did you hear he's going to spare the hotel workers because they're needed?
Well, maybe. He said he talked to the hotel people running the hotels, and he talked to the farmers, and we do need modernization of the agricultural workforce and the service sector. The irony of it, and this is not my hot take, but it is a prediction, is that if Democrats retake the House, I do see a path towards a bipartisan immigration bill with Trump as president, if he wants to work with us. It takes 2 to tango. And, he bashed the bipartisan border security deal that was being worked on when Biden was president. Wouldn't surprise me at all if a similar effort came together where you include border security with farm workforce modernization and a path to citizenship for dreamers. And, if Trump all of a sudden wouldn't think that's a good idea. I mean, he is known to reverse his position.
Yeah. Well, if you put his name on something, I think he'd be down.
I think you're right. Yeah. Hey, they can call it whatever the hell they want. I want to see good policy. And, we have far too many people right now who are suffering the consequences from the first couple months of the administration doing all kinds of bad stuff.
Well, Congressman Mike Levin, appreciate you stopping by. Thanks for the hot take, and we'll check in with you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast, the most popular public affairs podcast recorded in Greater Little Italy. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice of San Diego. Andrea Lopez Villafana is our managing editor. Jakob McQueen is our education reporter and the composer of our theme music. And Xavier Vasquez is the producer of this show. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.